The World Cup is the single biggest sporting event on the planet. Billions of people stop what they're doing, rearrange their schedules, and in some cases, fly across the world just to be part of it. But here's the thing. For all the noise, all the coverage, and all the conversations that happen every 4 years, there are parts of this tournament's history that most people have absolutely never heard of. So, with the 2026 World Cup right around the corner and the hype already building to a fever pitch, let's get into 10 things you probably didn't know about the tournament. Let's start with a question. How do you think most players prepare mentally before the biggest matches of their lives? Meditation, film study, long team meetings? Well, some coaches take a slightly different approach. They ban their players from having sex entirely during the tournament. Yes, you heard that right. Several managers over the years have gone as far as prohibiting their squads from bringing wives and girlfriends to the competition altogether, believing that any kind of romantic activity could drain the players physically or mentally. There's no scientific proof that it affects performance on the field, and funnily enough, history tends to agree. The teams that win the World Cup don't do so because they avoided their partners for 6 weeks, but that hasn't stopped some coaches from enforcing the ban anyway. Whether it works or not, it remains one of the stranger tactical decisions in world football. Speaking of things most people don't know, did you know the 1930 World Cup, the very first one ever held in Uruguay, is the only tournament in history that had 0 qualification rounds? Every nation affiliated with FIFA simply received an invitation. No playoffs, no qualifiers, no nail-biting final rounds, just a letter saying, "Come if you want." And yet, many European teams turned down the trip because the 2-week boat journey felt too long and too expensive. England didn't even bother. They felt the competition was beneath them and that they were too good for it, which is why they didn't play their first World Cup until 1950. Only 13 countries showed up in 1930, a remarkable contrast to this summer's tournament, where 48 teams will compete across 104 matches. Now, Brazil is involved in a lot of World Cup records, but this one stands completely alone. They are the only nation in history to have qualified for and played in every single World Cup since the first one in 1930. That's every edition across 22 tournaments. Not Germany, not Italy, not Argentina, just Brazil. They were also the first country to confirm their qualification for both the 2018 and 2022 editions, and that record continues in 2026. And while we're on the subject of who has and hasn't achieved things at this tournament, over 80 different countries have played in the World Cup since it began, but out of all of them, only 8 have ever actually won it. Brazil, Germany, Italy, Argentina, France, Spain, Uruguay, and England. That's it. Every other nation, including perennial contenders like the Netherlands, Portugal, and Belgium, has come close but never lifted the trophy. With the expanded 48-team format this year giving more nations a bigger slice of the tournament, don't be entirely surprised if we're about to add a 9th name to that very short list, from the most consistent to possibly the most infamous withdrawal. Let's talk about India and the 1950 World Cup. You may have heard the story that India pulled out because FIFA wouldn't let their players compete barefoot. It's a great story, but it isn't quite true. India did want to play without boots. They had actually done so at the 1948 Olympics, and FIFA indeed had rules against it. But the real reason for their withdrawal, they simply didn't think the World Cup was worth the journey. They couldn't see the value in travelling all the way to Brazil for a competition they didn't fully buy into. In hindsight, that decision looks a little stupid now, as they've never qualified for the World Cup since. Here's one that shifts from individual nations to the man who, to this day, holds one of the most jaw-dropping records in the entire history of the tournament. His name is Just Fontaine. Born in Marrakesh, he was a last-minute inclusion in the French squad for the 1958 World Cup in Sweden, largely unknown outside of the French league. Over the course of just 6 matches, he scored 13 goals, more than double what Pelé and Helmut Rahn, the next best, managed at that same tournament. What makes it even more remarkable is the fact that he didn't even have his own boots. He had damaged his pair in training and had to borrow a set from a teammate. Similarly, Germany's Miroslav Klose holds the all-time career scoring record with 16 World Cup goals across 4 tournaments. Messi sits on 13, just 3 behind, and Mbappe on 12. Crucially, with the expanded 48-team format adding an extra game to the knockout rounds, both have more matches available than Klose ever did. For the first time in a long time, history genuinely feels up for grabs. Now here's a fact that reveals something quite. It is obviously the greatest honour in the sport, but the actual trophy, you don't get to keep it. The original FIFA World Cup trophy, designed by Italian sculptor Silvio Gazzaniga and introduced in 1974, lives permanently in Zurich. On the night of the final, the winning captain lifts the solid gold original in front of the world and then hands it back. What the winners take home is a gold-plated bronze replica. The original is FIFA's forever. If you look at the base of the trophy, the names and years of winning countries are engraved in their native languages in a circular pattern, and there is now only space for 4 more nations before the base runs completely full, expected to happen after the 2038 tournament. Let's talk numbers, because the ones surrounding the World Cup are almost hard to believe. At the 2010 tournament in South Africa, approximately 3.2 billion people, nearly half the world's population at the time, watched at least 1 minute of the competition. That figure, collected by FIFA themselves, put the World Cup in a league of its own as the most viewed sporting event on Earth. Projections for the 2026 tournament put the viewership as high as 5.5 billion viewers. Absolutely bonkers! And it wasn't just the viewing figures that were staggering. Over 224,000 gallons of beer and 390,000 hot dogs were sold inside stadiums in South Africa alone. You can only imagine what those numbers will look like this year, where there are no Qatar-style restrictions on alcohol and the host cities have been preparing for what could be the biggest party in sports history. And speaking of records from 1950, the highest single-game attendance in World Cup history was set not in a modern mega stadium, but at the old Maracanã in Rio de Janeiro during the 1950 final between Uruguay and Brazil. Official figures put the crowd at 173,850 paying spectators, with some unofficial estimates, including fans who entered without tickets, running closer to 210,000. For context, the renovated Maracanã today holds just 73,531. That 1950 figure may never be matched. Before you say that stat is too old, just keep in mind that the 1986 final had an official attendance of 114,600 spectators at the Estadio Azteca in Mexico City. Now onto the money, and this is where the 2026 tournament does something truly historic. For 2026, FIFA has confirmed a total prize pool of $727 million, with the champions set to receive $50 million, a number that would have been unthinkable even a decade ago. Every single team at the tournament is now guaranteed at least $9 million just for qualifying, which for smaller nations can be genuinely transformational for their football infrastructure. And finally, here's one that blends football with human nature in the most unexpected way. Studies have shown that World Cup tournaments can trigger a measurable increase in birth rates 9 months later. Germany is the most documented case. After hosting and performing strongly in the 2006 tournament, the country recorded a 10% spike in births compared to a normal annual growth rate of under 1%. Researchers link it to increased alcohol consumption, high emotions, and the kind of national euphoria that apparently has consequences well beyond the football pitch. It's one of those facts that makes you look at World Cup celebrations slightly differently. The 2026 tournament kicks off soon. Whatever happens on the pitch, one thing is certain: it will add several more chapters to one of the most extraordinary stories in sporting history. Did you know any of these facts? Let us know in the comments.